Upheaval, Reckoning, Chapter 52, The Old Kingdom.
When the Old Kingdom Council started creating tributary projects in preparation for the coming of Oceanus, the Earth Pony faction focused their efforts on what would be their mightiest creation, the Cold Steel Construct. The companion, Smart Cookie, led the project, having been already known for her many similar creations. Each step that the thing took sent ominous shudders across the earth. Its enormous metal plates gleamed against the sunlight, while the hundreds of crystalline fragments embedded into them glittered. Underneath the armor, great ropey striations, like giant exposed muscles, could be seen. The cold steel construct was big enough to be at eye level with a siege tower, if the thing had eyes. Where its face should be, there was only a glittering metal plate. The design and specifics were Smart Cookie's, but labor and materials were provided for by Puddinghead. According to translated documents, several mines had to be shut down, and all their supplies of raw disruptor crystals were confiscated. An Earth Pony clan was left completely destitute by this resource drain. Puddinghead's clan was quick to sell them to Platinum for additional coin necessary to forge the massive cold steel parts needed for the construct. The first and second wave of Legion bolts swarmed the cold steel construct like a cloud of hornets, and had the same effect as hornets attacking an anvil. Great bolts of magic, from lightning to fire to raw concussive telekinesis, followed. The thing did not even slow its ponderous gait, taking the magical pounding with neither dent nor scratch. Several ballistae fired, but their bolts shattered and fell away. Unlike the Pegasus tributary project, the cold steel construct was never used in actual combat. It was hidden away within the capital and was lost when Oceanus's embrace was activated. The decision to not use it against our forces gives credence to the notion that the six companions already understood that the battle was lost and were preparing to seal themselves away until Oceanus awakened. With the seals around the Old Kingdom already in place, it is impossible to verify its state or the state of other constructs that Smart Cookie designed. Luna dearly wanted to join in. She knew that she could prevent a great many deaths if she lent her strength to the Legion for this encounter. The sight of the tributary project also ignited a trembling sense of rage. The firstborn didn't deserve so much as a spit in his direction, let alone a towering behemoth of metal and gems, powered by something more despicable than what it hinted at. She wanted to wrench every plate from this thing, to turn it into a pile of junk so twisted that even its makers wouldn't be able to make sense of what it was supposed to be. She wanted to tear down the rest of the Old Kingdom, brick by brick. Let no reminder of a time when Oceanus was welcome anywhere remain.
I will call you to my side.
Not one thing. The Old Kingdom's broken gates beckoned, however. Smaller constructs emerged from the depths of the ruin. Their plating looked more fragile and used more sparingly, exposing coils of wires and sets of gears like mechanical guts. Some were pony-shaped, others more bizarre in their design, as if torn straight out of whatever feverish nightmares that plagued Smart Cookie. One had the top half of a pony mounted on a set of 5 spidery legs. Another resembled a squid that dragged itself along drill-tipped tentacles. None of them noticed the small group of silent, invisible ponies sidling past them and into the ruins. Luna grit her teeth as the sounds of battle grew louder behind her. Blue Moon's reasoning was sound. They needed to push farther in. The Legion would have to deal with this. Though her spell kept the group invisible to other observers, it didn't keep them invisible to each other. Anxiety also gripped her sister and her friends. They also felt the urge to stay and fight. Applejack looked ready to bolt. Rainbow Dash also restlessly glanced back to the fray from time to time. Pinkie Pie kept her head low and her gaze forward. Rarity simply walked ahead grimly. It was Twilight Sparkle and Fluttershy who seemed intent on going deeper into the ruins. There were other concerns as well. As Luna moved closer and closer to such a great concentration of the Firstborn's power, a revolting sense of elation welled from within. There was a hurry in her steps she was struggling to get rid of. She shook her hooves as if the anxiety was some kind of muck clinging to her. It didn't help. All it did was elicit a worried glance from her sister. Luna couldn't answer that glance. This wasn't the time to bring out her situation. What would happen if she did? Would they offer their support? Would they even trust her when they were plunging deeper into the Old Kingdom? Her brother promised that he would not allow Oceanus to have anything, but Torado was missing, seemingly swallowed whole by the power he promised he would stop. If Torado couldn't hold back the power of the Abyss, what could she? Luna. Celestia's soft tone, barely even a whisper, snapped Luna out of her downward spiraling reverie. Celestia walked by her side. The worried glance had turned into a concerned stare. Are you still tired, little sister? I could lend you some strength. Luna shook her head. No, she said just as softly. I've recovered enough. I'll be fine so long as no pony starts losing limbs. The last part had been meant only as some form of measurement. As soon as she said it, however, she winced when the others glanced at the bloody handkerchief wrapped around Fluttershy's face. Fluttershy didn't seem to notice. If she did, she showed no signs of cringing at the attention. She looked more intent on studying their surroundings. Luna could sympathize with that. They were surrounded by a monument to Firstborn. They had to focus on orienting themselves and getting used to its appearance. A strange atmosphere surrounded the entirety of the Old Kingdom. Descending the crater was like slipping through a thin veil of water. Above, the cloudy winter sky looked to be clearing up. More sunlight filtered through the clouds. It barely mattered here. Whatever presence they had entered muted the light that hit the ruins. It was no fog of darkness, but the shadows thrown by the many ruined structures seemed to ripple slightly. Luna had to squint just to get some details around the place. It was as if everything was just ever so slightly out of focus. Then the smell. The smell was horrid, and it belied the sterile look of the place. There wasn't a patch of mold or a piece of rotting flesh in sight, but the cloying, lingering traces of decay hung heavily on the air. Luna didn't dare take a deep breath, fearing that taking so much of this foul air at once would corrode her lungs beyond any healing. The group quickly moved away from the main road that led through the gates of the Old Kingdom. A steady stream of clanking, whining, and grinding metal flooded the main road as more and more monstrosities fed the growing battle between the Legion and the Old Kingdom's mechanical reserves. They saddled through a passageway between two broken buildings and hunkered down. "What now?" Rainbow asked. The strain in her voice, a product of having to move so carefully and hold back her enthusiasm, was evident. "Where should we go?" "Down is the most obvious answer," Celestia said. "Remember that the Old Kingdom was built over the blasphemous rift, and the heart of the rift contains the foul weapon. We must keep going down." She looked over to Twilight, whose eyebrows had furrowed in deep thought. "Twilight?" "Something that I read about this place," Twilight said. "If I recall correctly, we need to find a tower. Translations from some Old Kingdom texts said that the 6 companions discovered an existing structure before construction of this place even began. They supposedly used it to ascend the depths to the abyss." Her eyes narrowed further. "It was also written that none of them managed to complete the journey, so they guarded it jealously." "Ascend the depths?" Rarity asked. "Talk about bad grammar. Was Lexarius turning into discord by the time this translation was made?" Applejack rolled her eyes. "Sure, let's chalk that up to the list of bad things he did. Went insane, spread chaos, and had bad grammar." She tugged at her chain. "Anyway, let's go find this tower. I don't want to spend any moment longer than we have to here. This place gives me the creeps. What with all those weird root designs all over the buildings, they look so nasty." "Those aren't roots," Twilight said. She put a hoof against one side of a building and traced the building design that Applejack was talking about. All the walls and great portions of the streets of the Old Kingdom had long, coiling tentacles built into the stonework. Some were not thicker than a foreleg, others around the same size as an oak trunk. It looked as if the city played host to the roots of a gigantic tree, or was infested with thousands of enormous worms. "They're the tentacles of Oceanus. They're built all over the Old Kingdom, from the plazas and courtyards to the houses. Even the smallest bathroom or bedroom has at least one. They were supposed to represent that, from the most public to the most private affairs, the will of the Deep Father held sway." "Disgusting," Rarity said with a shudder. "Garish, too. Why would any pony want to live in a house that looked like it was about to be dragged away by a squid?" "I don't know," Pinky said. She pressed her front hooves against her eyes and let out a moan. But it's kind of hurting my eyes and my brain." "You're being oppressed," Celestia said. Every pony turned towards her. "There is more to the Old Kingdom's design than mere aesthetics. Focus, my little ponies. We are not going on a little tour. The moment we entered those gates, we had already started fighting against this place." They huddled closer after that. Rainbow Dash flew up, trying to ascend to a high enough point without drawing any attention. A moment later, she flew back down to them. "I don't see any tower," she said. "If there is one, it's probably destroyed." "Big sister, what about your location spells?" Luna asked. The golden brilliance radiating from Celestia's horn held the stifling atmosphere at bay for a bit. "Not much better," she said. "The power of the abyss is so thick here, using my magic is like trying to keep a torch lit in a blizzard. To make matters worse, this place is under a powerful dimensional lock. I do not know if it's a function of the power of the abyss, or a remnant of Lexarius' seal. She stared at Luna. Did it trouble you as much to maintain those stealth spells? Luna shook her head. No, I would guess that the power of the abyss has a particular distaste for the power of sunlight. Celestia turned towards Twilight. You've seen the maps of this place, haven't you? She asked. Twilight nodded. Not just seen, Your Highness. Memorized. The pride was unmistakable in her tone. I know where the old tower to the abyss should be. Good. Celestia mirrored that pride with a smile. We will need that. No doubt these side streets would have been confusing enough during the Old Kingdom's height. The decay and stagnation of the power of the abyss here would have made things worse. Worse? Luna asked. What do you mean, big sister? Do you mean the damages caused by flooding and the poor lighting? Not just that, Celestia said. You were not there during the immediate aftermath of the First Rebellion. Great sections of Imperia were warped by the passage of the power of the abyss. If the Six Companions were toying with even the lingering presence of it, we should expect oddities. She looked to Twilight and her friends. Do not let your attention linger too long on the architecture. Remember that the power of the abyss can and will hurt you in ways you may not expect. We'll be ready, Twilight said. As they resumed moving through the side street, Celestia's horn continued to glow. Her persistent location, combined with the knowledge Twilight had gleaned, should have a sure path to their goal, despite the warping of this place. Now that they were away from the main road, it also became clear that whatever was muting the light had a similar effect on sound. While they had no problem hearing each other, the whining and grinding sounds of metal against stone quickly faded into faint scratching, even though they hadn't walked that far. Far from being serene, the silence of the Old Kingdom only served to emphasize the unnerving sounds that reached them. Faint whispers drifted through the stale air. The words, when they could be made out, made no sense in either Equestrian or Old Kingdom. It wasn't just whispers, either. An out-of-place hoofstep, the creak of a door swinging, a light clink of some small metal thing landing somewhere. Once in a while, they could be heard, always brief and at a distance, always dancing between being imagined and actually heard. They were on a very slight downward slope. The Old Kingdom was built like a massive crater. The entrance was along the very edges of it, and the central plaza was close to the very center. The side streets were warped as Celestia had predicted, some in the most bizarre ways. They didn't always travel on a flat surface. Sometimes the street curved or distorted like crumpled ribbon. Shadowy doorways to ruined buildings beckoned entry, only to disappear when looked at again. A distant light sometimes appeared in some of the windows. They flickered and vanished around the peripheries. A few times the warping was so confusing that Twilight paused for minutes trying to piece together enough clues where to go next. They approached the central plaza, and around it should be 3 faction buildings of the Old Kingdom. The Palace of Princess Platinum, which also served as Clover the Clever's library, the laboratory, and headquarters of Commander Hurricane and Pansy, and the earthworks of Smart Cookie and Puddinghead. From a distance, it looked like none of them had survived. Cracks and small potholes pockmarked the gray-green stone pavement they walked on. The surface had the sheen of dampness everywhere. Small puddles of water collected in the indentures, although these did not have the mirror-like finish of the lake. The stone was cold, unnaturally so. Despite her silver herd-forged shoes, Luna shivered. The walls were just as bad.
It's kind of weird that this place is so clean,
Rainbow Dash said. She was the only pony flying around, and the draft from her wings blew more of the foul, cold air towards Luna's face. She didn't chastise the Pegasus, however. Rainbow Dash looked relentless and uneasy. If flying helped with that, then Luna didn't mind.
I thought there'd be more dead bodies around.
Rainbow Dash, Rarity snapped. That's distasteful.
Hey, it's not like I want more dead bodies around. Remember Clover the Clever's refuge? It had a bunch of dead bodies floating around even after hundreds of years.
Her voice lowered.
I'm just wondering what happened to all the ponies who lived here if their city got swallowed by a lake. That's all.
Don't jinx it, Sugar Cube, Applejack said. She glanced towards the darkened entrances to the many ruined buildings around them. We might just find out.
Maybe,
Pinkie Pie whimpered. The others looked to where she was pointing.
Maybe they all got washed down there.
The side street they were following split in two, one which led to the main plaza, while the other continued to wind into a veritable maze of ruins. The plaza was not infested with Smart Cookie's monstrosities, much to their relief. It seemed that the horrible constructs that were attacking the Legion were coming from someplace else. Indeed, the plaza was bereft of anything, save for a wide, flat space and a hole around a couple dozen feet across. The tentacles of Oceanus swirled around the hole and down it. From their spot, it was difficult to tell if a great many of the things were wriggling in or wriggling out. 6 pedestals surrounded the hole symmetrically. All were nearly completely destroyed. One still had a large fragment of the statue sitting on it intact. It looked like the hind legs of a pony rearing up and over the hole. While the sight proved disturbing enough, the sounds near the place was worse. There were ponies crying, the distant whispers of a hurt foal, and the stifled sobs of other ponies. It was impossible to focus on them. The sounds had a life of their own, drifting to the periphery whenever some pony tried to listen better.
What is that? Rainbow asked. Some kind of well?
Celestia's eyes narrowed. She already knew what it was, as did Luna. Neither of them offered an explanation. When the other bearers looked at Twilight Sparkle, they knew that one was coming anyway.
Not a well, Twilight said. A pit. If that's the main plaza, then that would be the pit of rejects. Rejected what? Pinkie Pie said. The 6 companions wanted their everlasting kingdom to be perfect, Twilight said.
She kicked aside a piece of rubble and stared at the pit in disgust.
That included the residents. Every full-born had to pass stringent qualifications. Those that failed, well, they were rejected.
Rarity swallowed.
Rejected as in they were thrown down there.
Twilight looked towards the side streets.
The parents were expected to spend the next 3 days begging for forgiveness and promising to do better. Let's go, girls. The tower should be just a little way off now that we've reached this point. If you don't mind, I don't want to pass that way.
No pony said anything, but they did take the other street. The gentle sobbing faded as they put the forsaken pit behind them.
Wait, are we heading for that weird dome? Rainbow Dash asked.
She no longer needed to put in so much effort in keeping her voice subdued. Even her wing beats slowed just to keep from making too much noise.
I thought we were looking for a tower. The maps I read all point to that spot as the place for the tower to the abyss, Twilight said. I know it doesn't look like a tower, but I don't think we should be relying on looking when it comes to things like the abyss.
They skirted around the main plaza, past the wreckage of the 3 main buildings of the Old Kingdom. Nearly nothing had been left of the 3 buildings. Perhaps it was better that way. The dome-shaped structure, however, was mostly intact. Its walls had a glossy white finish, smooth as worked marble and easily distinguishable from the gray-green stone that comprised the rest of the city. Not only that, there were no signs of cracking anywhere around it. The entrance was a doorway that would have allowed a fully grown dragon through. Hoofsteps echoed through the empty building when they entered. The floor inside was spotless and as white as the outer walls. The space was uncluttered as well. If this was some other city in Equestria, Luna would have assumed that this was a parading ground or a place of gathering. She looked at the ceiling. There might be something that could clue them in on what this so-called Tower to the Abyss really was. They certainly were not doing any climbing or descending in this emptiness. She looked up and gasped. The ceiling was also white and partially luminescent. Despite the dark atmosphere of the Old Kingdom, they could see much better here, enough to clearly make out the incredible detail on the murals above them. The face of Oceanus stared at them from the very center of the ceiling. At least, it was a depiction of Oceanus's face. Luna was already sure that the firstborn was not black, nor did he have a wriggling mass of tentacles for a mane. The sides depicted scenes from what she could guess was a history of the Old Kingdom. 3 separate nations were shown at one part, a city above the clouds, a grand castle high in the mountains, and villages across a wide plain. A little to the right showed the same nations surrounded by 6 great pony shapes of swirling whites and blues.
The Wendigos, Twilight Sparkle said softly as she stared at the same part of the mural. This must be the starting point. The Wendigos were the ones that forced the early ponies to seek the power of Oceanus. Excelos, Fluttershy said. She was also staring at that part of the mural. Minoros, Costis, Menitis, Erebos, and Locoris.
Every pony stared at Fluttershy. Twilight's jaw dropped when the others looked with concern.
Fluttershy, how do you know those names?
Twilight asked. For a moment, Fluttershy didn't even seem to hear them. She continued to look at the particular section of the mural as if she was looking at an old family photograph.
Fluttershy?
Celestia asked.
Huh?
Fluttershy turned around and winced when she saw them all staring at her.
How do you know all those names?
Celestia asked.
Well,
Fluttershy pawed the floor nervously.
I don't really know. I must have read them off of one of those books in Canterlot, I think.
What else do you know about them? No suspicion marred Celestia's voice. Indeed, she sounded genuinely interested, as if Fluttershy brought up a fun little topic at a tea party. Luna wondered if her sister suddenly decided to pick this time to show off how well she could lie, or if she meant every word. The effect was immediate. Fluttershy relaxed and went back to looking at the mural.
Well, she said, they were friends, I think. They were a small group within the Equos de Abisso. When Regia Carnifex left, they started thinking that they didn't want to serve as well, so they severed the tie.
Luna looked to her sister.
Enforcers cutting off their tie, she asked incredulously. Is this even possible?
The bond between an Alicorn summoner and his or her enforcers is tightly knit, sometimes to the point where they even find it difficult to determine where they begin and end, Celestia replied. I've never seen it happen, or even heard of such a thing. Still, I imagine that it's possible. Ultimately, enforcers can make their own decisions if cornered in such a way, and I'm sure Oceanus' actions were extreme enough to give even some of his enforcers pause.
But I've never heard of enforcers going around without an Alicorn, Luna said. What would have happened to them? Let's ask, shall we?
Celestia looked back to Fluttershy.
What happened then? The pain was... it was unbearable.
Fluttershy pressed a hoof against her ruined eye.
They went blind with it, turned their rage on everything around them.
Her gaze went from the scene where the Wendigos surrounded the three nations to where they were chasing a large group of ponies. Blue-white swirls had tangled a few of the fleeing ponies. The next scene showed 6 ponies wreathed in blackness, the 6 companions standing against the Wendigos.
They lost in the end. Fluttershy, I'm definitely sure there's no way you could have read that somewhere, Twilight said.
Fluttershy looked blankly at Twilight, and then to the rest of her concerned friends.
Isn't there? She asked. I mean, where else would I have found out?
Twilight's eyes narrowed.
You sounded like you were there, like you knew each of those Wendigos, like you felt their pain.
Fluttershy shrank away from Twilight and looked away.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how I know.
Sugar Cube, are you okay? Applejack asked. You've been acting mighty strange since you got
hammered to a pulp,
Rainbow said. She ignored the glares and shot her way.
You're creeping us out with this scary eye blasting and this history lesson from nowhere.
Fluttershy dropped to a low crouch, pressing a hoof against her ruined eye even harder.
I don't know. I don't.
A white feathered wing draped over Fluttershy.
Hush, Fluttershy, Celestia said. I believe you.
Big sister, do you know what's going on? Luna asked. She hoped that the answer was a definite yes. Being attended to by enforcers was no common gift among Alicorns, and knowledge about them, despite the Eternal Herd's long history, was scarce. Even the enforcers themselves had little self-knowledge, and they had never been inclined to discover.
Not quite, Celestia said.
The glow around her horn brightened briefly. I do know this is no case of possession, replacement, or any sort of malicious action by one of the Equos de Abisso. I would have noticed something so obvious, and that is not how enforcers act.
Then what's wrong with her?
Twilight asked. She cringed when Celestia answered with a stern look. It would be too quick on our part to assume that something wrong has happened, Celestia said. Something obviously has, and the involvement of the Equos de Abisso is troubling. Let's not forget, however, that Fluttershy is alive right now because of this change. Silence washed over them like another stifling wave of the ruined city's foulness. Rainbow Dash actually landed and stared at her hooves. Twilight put a hoof on Fluttershy's shoulder.
Sorry, she said, for not trusting you.
It's all right, Twilight, Fluttershy said.
I don't really trust me right now.
We must focus on more pressing matters, Celestia said. The magical energies around this place have been recently disturbed. Black Rose has clearly gone this way. But we've gone as low as we can go, Applejack said. She tapped the floor with her hooves. Sounds pretty solid to me. Applejack yelped when golden light flared next to her hooves. The other huddled closer to the princesses as the light began to trace a circular pattern that spanned nearly the entire floor of the dome. Luna studied the markings and shook her head. Necromantic array, she said. This is bad. Indeed, Celestia said. The array is very old, likely inscribed by the 6 companions themselves when they frequented this place. Why is that a problem? Twilight asked. Luna's eyes narrowed. The problem, Twilight Sparkle, is that I'm not even half the necromancer my brother is. She glanced towards Celestia. And I'm better than Big Sister at it. Celestia frowned and looked away. It is a rare gift, she said. One I would not have used if I did have it. Regardless, Luna, you can decipher these things better than I can. What can you tell from them? Luna studied the array for several minutes, following the wide circle across the huge space. Unlike her sister, she did wish she had the talent for necromancy. The school was often maligned, sometimes even by its own practitioners, for its manipulation of things like grudge, necrotic energies, and life force. But it had its uses, as this difficult array was proving. After what may have been half an hour, she looked towards the others. Oddly enough, this is a form of transport spell, she said. But transportation spells belong to summoning conjurations, Twilight said. Shouldn't Princess Celestia be able to use it easily, then? If it was to travel to a more conventional place, it would be, Luna replied. The spell will take its targets to the base of the tower. It is a place at the very edge of the abyss, created by the foul weapon, and will swallow any pony foolish enough to transverse it without preparations. She traced one section of the glowing circle with her hoof. Right here is an incantation for a pact with the power of the abyss. With some modification, my sister and I can use it to protect all of you from being swallowed. She didn't mention another detail she noticed, something which she was unsure her sister had noticed as well. The circle strongly resembled an eternal herd array. Either the 6 companions had some outside help making it, or this thing was here before even the old kingdom was built. Oceanus would not have needed this, neither would his strongest servants. What was it for? Don't you mean we? Rarity asked. She laughed nervously and glanced at both Luna and Celestia. The both of you are coming, right? Luna didn't bother hiding the resignation in her tone. We can't. The 6 of them withered at this. With our limited affinity for necromancy, my sister and I will need to work together with this array just to maintain it on the rest of you. If the ritual is interrupted while you are inside the tower, you will be swallowed by the abyss. But, Twilight hesitated and looked towards Celestia. Black Rose and her thorns must have taken this path, and the 6 companions, too. How did they— The 6 companions only needed a more rudimentary form of the spell, Luna said. They had no problem embracing the abyss. That is not a path you would want to take. As for Black Rose, she is a very skilled necromancer in her own right, much more than even most alicorns I know. Combine that with how this place is reacting to Big Brother, it would have been easy for her to pass through here with her thorns. Twilight, Celestia approached her student with a smile and a hoof on the shoulder. Past this portal, you must confront Black Rose and her thorns in the fell weapon's presence. My brother is also within. Find a way to aid him, and he will aid you. I'm sorry I cannot go with you, but— the smile widened. I know all of you can do this, if you stand together. A tear rolled down Twilight's cheek. She shuddered, and her legs looked shaky, but she answered the smile with one of her own. We will, Your Highness. The 6 bearers of the elements of harmony stood at the center of the circle, while Celestia and Luna occupied opposing points. Are you ready? Luna asked. Twilight nodded grimly. Her friends held hoofs behind her. The circle of light intensified as both sisters focused their magic. There was a flash, the same sort that would have accompanied a teleportation circle. And they were gone. Twilight shook her head while her eyes adjusted. For a moment, she almost didn't want them to. The old kingdom was an awful enough sight, a ruined testament to the very worst of pony kind, a tomb drowned by both water and wickedness. What nightmare awaited her at the edge of the abyss? When Twilight's vision finally cleared, the next question was, did we make a mistake? It looked as if they were still in the old kingdom. The walls were seamless gray stone, as if the entire tower had been crafted from a single block. The lighting didn't come close to illuminating the ceiling, or even the entirety of where they were. A spiral stair wound its way up the walls and into the darkness above them, each step wide enough to allow 2 ponies to walk side by side, and rising only a few inches at a time. The floor was— there was no floor. They were standing in complete blackness, and— She paused. Wait, where were they getting their light anyway? She lifted a front hoof to her face and stared at it. She was emanating a faint white light. Her friends were scattered across the floor, also glowing. Ugh, I'm never going to get used to all these teleportation spells, Applejack said with a groan. The others rose unsteadily behind her. Where are we now? And can't some pony turn on a light? I'm so sick of all this darkness. Twilight focused on a light spell. They were in for the fight of their lives, and she didn't want to do it in a place where she could barely see a few feet ahead of her. The magic flowed and the spell finished, but no light appeared. Twilight frowned. That was weird. She could feel her globe of light. She moved it around and felt its presence, but the darkness was as pervasive as ever.
Sorry, she said. We'll have to make do with the, self-illumination?
Rarity felt around her forelegs and chest.
Oh, my stars! I'm completely luminescent. I knew I was going to shine one day, but not like this. This is the edge of the abyss, huh?
Once Rainbow Dash got her bearings, she was immediately airborne.
It's not so bad. It's just more darkness and stone. So, what's next for us?
Twilight pointed to the stairs.
What else is there? We start climbing. Don't fly ahead, Rainbow. It's too dangerous.
Hold on a second here, Applejack said. Why are we going up? Ain't we supposed to be going down to this blasphemous rift?
True, Twilight replied. But there is no downward path. We climb because there's nowhere else to go.
Applejack scratched her head. Well, that doesn't...
Girls!
Pinkie Pie cried out. She pressed her face against the blackness they were stepping on.
Check this out!
Twilight looked at the ground.
What is it? She asked.
Over there! Pinkie Pie tapped at the floor and pointed.
They're a long, long way away, but you can see the princesses over there.
Twilight squinted and then gasped. There were 2 ponies at the distance. They were also glowing, making them a bit easier to spot in the darkness. Those were her mentors, mane and tail, now back to their usual flowing colors. The golden circle of light was also easy to see. She thrust a hoof towards them, but the floor blocked her foreleg.
Are they...
Rarity was also squinting at the 2 figures.
Are they upside down?
Pinkie Pie giggled.
Yeah, they are. I can see the bottoms of their fancy shoes.
Twilight swallowed as she realized something.
They're not upside down, she said.
The others looked to her. Twilight, I can see them too, Applejack said. They're upside down.
No,
Twilight tapped a hoof against the floor.
Don't you get it? This tower is inverted. That portal we used was the very base of this building. Now we're inside.
Pinkie tapped a hoof against her face.
So that means we're upside down?
Twilight nodded.
To put it simply, yes. The slowest floor is the highest point of the tower. The more we ascend, the further into the depths we go, Rarity said. Not such bad grammar after all, Lexarius. Okay then, Rainbow said. Let's start climbing. Wait, Twilight put a hoof up. Do you hear that?
Her ears perked at the very faint, distant sound coming from above them. Whatever it was a long way up. It's just more ghostly sounds, Sugar Cube, Applejack said. Just ignore it.
No, this one's different. It sounds like some ponies playing some kind of violin.
Rarity's eyes narrowed as she listened.
No, dear, that's not a violin you're hearing.
Her mage blade started floating by her side.
It's a cello.